the state capitalist notion. All right, well, this is out there, right? It's what they call the third camp Trotskyites generally put this out, but other people put it out as well, right? The idea is that Trotsky, he didn't like Stalin. He declared that the USSR under Stalin was what he called a degenerated worker state. But then there were followers of Trotsky in New York City. They call them the New York intellectuals. This is a whole book about them, actually, which I draw heavily from in my synthetic left research. It's called The New York Intellectuals by Alan M. Wald. And it is a whole history of this grouping in New York City. They called the New York intellectuals Trotskyites who broke with Trotsky. And they said, no, 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 the Soviet Union's not a degenerated worker state. It's not a deformed worker state. The Soviet Union is state capitalism. That was the New York intellectuals, they were called. Max Shachtman was probably the most influential figure among them. There was also James Burnham. There was also Martin Aburn. There was, who else? And eventually out of that you got Susan Sontag, you got Irving Kristol, the father of neoconservatism, but they broke with Trotsky, and Tony Cliff in the UK, very good one, Joseph, right, and they argued that the Soviet Union was state capitalism. State capitalism. That the Soviet Union, there was a new ruling class called in the state, and they were exploiting the workers, and the Soviet Union was capitalism, just everything was run by the state. Well, the problem with that argument is that there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what capitalism is. Capitalism is not simply one group of people owning and controlling the means of production. It's one group of people owning and controlling the means of production to make profits. Let me emphasize that. Friedrich Engels said that under capitalism, the means of production only function as preliminary transformation into capital, meaning houses only get built so money can be made off them. Food is only grown so money can be made off them. Under capitalism, profits are in command, as Mao said. Capitalism is a system of production organized for profit. So simply saying that in the Soviet Union, which is true, there was a party elite, there was a party bureaucracy, there was a nomenclatura, or what's the correct word for it? There was a group of people in the party. There were party elites who had bigger houses than other people, had nicer cars than other people. Simply saying that existed does not prove it's capitalist, because capitalism is production organized for profit, not saying that, oh, there was this group of people who had, disproportionate power and a little more, wealth than other people, right? Soviet bureaucrats, maybe they had bigger houses, maybe they had bigger cars than everybody else, but they weren't, gazillionaires and millionaires and billionaires, right? They lived better than average workers did, no question about it, but their money, their wages came out of the same surplus that everyone's wages came out of, right? That they were bureaucrats. They were bureaucrats. They were not capitalists, right? The capitalist's interest is contrary to the interest of his employees. The lower the worker gets paid, the more money the capitalist makes. The higher the wage of the worker, the less profits the capitalist gets. The capitalist wants to drive the wages of his employees down so that he can maximize his own profits. The worker wants to maximize his own wages, and that cuts into the profits of the capitalist. There is a contrary interest. The capitalist wants to hire as few workers as possible to maximize his own profits. The worker wants to be employed, right? So there are contrary interests there. The Soviet bureaucracy wanted the Soviet people and Soviet society overall to become wealthier, so that they could get wealthier and their position would be more solidified, right? That the definition of a ruling class, not a ruling clique, not a bureaucracy, not a privileged group, but a ruling class. A ruling class has contrary interests to other classes. However, the Soviet bureaucracy had the same interests as the Soviet working class. They had privileges, they had bureaucratic privilege. But, the fall of the Soviet Union, great example, right? The fall of the Soviet Union was the destruction of the Soviet bureaucracy. The Soviet bureaucracy was broken apart, and Western capitalism set up shop in the former Soviet Union. Did that benefit Russian workers? No, right? If they were a separate class, right? If the bureaucracy of the former Soviet Union had been a separate class, right? If that class had been broken apart, it would have been good for the workers. Well, no, it was bad for them, right? I mean, that simply arguing that there is a privileged bureaucracy in a socialist state does not make it capitalist. Capitalism is production for profit. And in the Soviet Union, you had state central planning, and production was not carried out to make profits. It was carried out according to a state central plan, right? The Soviet Union did all kinds of stuff that did not make profits for people, that it was good for society overall, like building huge power plants, like, industrializing the whole country. They had a state central plan. They planned out their economy and carried it out. They didn't simply say, okay, okay, you're the bureaucrat and head of this industry, what'll make you more money? Okay, it's not how it worked. There was a state that capitalism is the rule of profits. Socialism is rational state central planning. The Soviet Union did not have a capitalist economy. It had a privileged bureaucracy. Great example. And actually, I think this comes from Trotsky of all people, and I'm not a fan of Trotsky, but, Trotsky could spell these things out because he was not, in the Soviet government anymore. So he could speak more explicitly, right? The Soviet government, it was necessary for them to speak very carefully. They were representing the Soviet state. Trotsky, that's why I encourage people, as much as I don't like Trotsky and I denounce his theory of permanent revolution, there's a little more candor and honesty there, and there's a nitpicky criticism, but he understood how the Soviet Union worked because he helped build it. And Trotsky makes the analogy, I've made this analogy many times because it's accurate, of what is a bureaucracy. So if you're building socialism in a country that is impoverished, right, in a country that has historically been poor, you're not going to have huge surpluses of food at first. There's going to be limited amounts of food. So you're going to have to ration the food and make sure that everyone gets some food. Make sure that one group of people doesn't get more food than other people and let other people starve. You're going to have to ration as you plan out the economy. You're going to have to say, okay, you get this much, and you're going to have to decide who gets what. So if you're rationing the food to make sure that everyone gets enough food, you're going to have a guard that makes sure that as they're handing out that bread to people, nobody cuts in the line and nobody punches somebody else and takes their bread. You're going to have a guard, somebody who's the guard who makes sure that the rules are enforced and that everyone gets their ration. But here's the problem. That guard is taking on way more responsibility than everybody else because he is taking on the responsibility of being the guard. He's not just one of the people in the line getting their little piece of food. He's taking on the responsibility of being the guard. So he's going to demand that, okay, fine, I'll be the guard, but I get a bigger slice of bread than everybody else because I'm taking on the line of being the guard. So he's going to get a bureaucratic privilege because he's the guard. That's the bureaucracy. But then the question becomes, how do you prevent the bureaucracy from just taking their bread and overturning socialism, right? How do you control the bureaucracy? And how do you prevent something like in the USSR? In the USSR collapsed because half the bureaucracy just threw in the towel. Half the government bureaucracy in the USSR, pretty big chunk of it, just said, you know what, yeah, we're done with this. And they threw in the towel and surrendered. How do you prevent that from happening? Well, Stalin and the 1930s Soviet Union, the way they prevented it was with a police state and Yezhovshchina. And, they had a secret police, and if you were conspiring or something like that, you disappeared in the middle of the night. There was a police state apparatus. There was a highly politicized secret police that made sure that anyone who seemed like they were going to dismantle socialism or work against socialism was dealt with. That was one way of doing it. After Stalin's death, you have Khrushchev's secret speech, you have the bureaucracy becoming less and less revolutionary, and the Soviet Union eventually falls. Well, what was another method? Mao had a different method of dealing with the bureaucracy. He said, we're going to mobilize society to constantly be kicking the bureaucracy's ass, the Cultural Revolution, right? We're going to mobilize mobs of Red Guard youth that'll constantly be terrorizing the bureaucracy. Are you a capitalist roader? And raiding their, and we're going to, instead of having a secret police do it, we're going to have a mobilization of mobs of people, and we're going to have like mob rule kind of to control and kick the ass of the bureaucracy. Well, that didn't turn out too well either. Didn't turn out too well, right? The Cultural Revolution was a nightmare. Mob rule, not good. Police state rule, not good. So how do you deal with this question of bureaucracy? This has been really the question that has defined 20th century communism. How do you deal with bureaucracy? How do you prevent the bureaucracy from doing what the Soviet bureaucracy did and surrendering? Well, China has found the answer. You create other ways for people to move up in society. You enable a market sector, right? If somebody in the Soviet Union, the only way you could get ahead, the only way you could get more money than everybody else was to get into the party bureaucracy. So a lot of people joined the Communist Party, didn't believe in communism. They just wanted a bigger slice of bread than everybody else. Well, that's a problem, isn't it? But in China, they said, okay, the Communist Party is for people who believe in communism. But if you just want to make money, go start a tech company. Go start a real estate company. And they created the market sector for the place for people that are just ambitious, just greedy, just want to get ahead. They go into the market sector. Meanwhile, the Communist Party remains only for people that are committed to communism. So the Communist Party becomes this ideological core, but people that just want to get ahead can go into the market sector, and the party controls the market sector. This is the method through which this problem of bureaucracy has been resolved, right? Is that if the bureaucracy is the only place where people can become wealthy, or the only place where people can, quote unquote, advance in a society, that's where the problem starts. Because, at the time of the fall of the Soviet Union, about half the Soviet Communist Party didn't believe in communism, right? So you have to make an area for social mobility to take place, for people to be ambitious, for people to get ahead in the market sector. So the party is only for people that are committed to the ideology. The party is for people who believe in communism, not people who want to get rich, right? And President Xi Jinping is cracking down in the party on all kinds of bribery and all that. In China, they've done that, right? If you want to get rich in China, you don't join the Chinese Communist Party, right? If you want to get rich in China, you go into the private sector. The Communist Party is for people who are loyal to the party line. Cuba is adjusting to be more like this, right? North Korea would like to adjust to be more like this. This is a much better method of purifying the bureaucracy. That the police state stuff under Stalin, it worked for a little while. The Cultural Revolution, pretty much a nightmare, right? That ultimately, the way to make sure that the bureaucracy remains true to revolutionary principles is to make sure that it doesn't become the only place where people can advance. And this is what we have learned from communism in the 20th century. And this is the question of bureaucracy. A bureaucracy is not a capitalist class. A bureaucracy is a different kind of entity. Now I know there's people in here agreeing with me, there's people in here disagreeing with me, and that's okay. But this is what I'm explaining to you, right? That the problem of bureaucracy, right, is resolved by having a state sector. When you have an overall state central plan, right? When you have an overall state central plan, when the means of production are controlled by the state, but you allow people to start their own companies and start their own businesses and start their own hotels and their own restaurants and their own little tech startups, but the party controls them, that is a mechanism for making sure you don't have this problem that plagued the Soviet Union of a counter-revolutionary wing of the bureaucracy developing. So I hope that answered the question. But yeah, a bureaucracy is not a class. A class and a bureaucracy are two different things. And that, nomenclature existed in the Soviet Union. It exists in China. It exists in Cuba. Every socialist country is going to have, is it nomenclatura, nomenclature? There's correct terms for it. A new, that's going to exist, right? If you're the head of a state-run, look at it. Look at the United States right now. Do you think Pentagon generals don't make huge salaries? Do you think that the person who's the CEO of PBS, which is a government-funded TV station, it's like, yes, people that do very, very important jobs in state-run economies are going to demand that they get paid a lot for it, because they're harder to replace, and they're taking on a huge responsibility, right? And that's, as long as there is scarcity, and that's what people don't understand. People say, well, bureaucracy should be separate from ambition, but in China there are billionaires in the party. Well, wouldn't you rather have the billionaires in the party than outside of the party? Wouldn't you rather have billionaires constantly being held accountable to party standards, right? Because the party is held to higher standards of discipline, right, than the population, right? If you're in the party and you get caught taking bribes, you're in way more trouble than an average person is for getting caught taking bribes. I'd rather have billionaires be in the party and be forced to obey the party's discipline than just doing their own thing. I think it's a good thing. But anyway, but the point that I was making, what was the point I was making? Oh, right, is that equality, right? This is the biggest pet peeve of mine. I was taught in school that communism believes that everyone should get paid the exact same wage no matter how hard they work. And then people are like, oh, well, communists want to make everyone equal. Well, look, in the Soviet Union or in China or in Cuba, this guy has a lot more money than everybody else. So therefore, it's not communist. Ah, ha, 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 ha. No, it's not rude. Keep super chatting. I like super chats, right? That's the thing. That's malarkey. No socialist country in the world has had total equality, okay? Equality, everyone getting paid the same wage, is not advocated anywhere in Marx's writings. Nobody in the entire history of the communist movement has said that when we come to power, everyone gets paid the exact same wage. Never. Albania was the only country in socialism that ever came close to that. And even they had 4 different wages, right? Albania, they had 4 pay scales. 4. Okay, so that's very simple, but it's still, they had 4 different pay scales. And the top one and the lower one were definitely not the same. So, you know, the goal is not everyone gets paid the same wage. The goal is to rationally plan out the economy and create vast material abundance so that the need for coercion and the need for a wage system at all starts to fade away. The road to equality is material abundance. The goal of socialism is with a state-run, rationally planned economy, you create vast abundance. Is it because of Red Scare propaganda that the Libertarian Party is good third party over the Green Party? Oh, okay. Over the Green Party. But yes, the goal is to create vast material abundance so that class differences and inequality and the need for anyone to hoard anything starts to fade away. That is the basis of it. Like, the goal is not to make everyone equal, right? Libertarians, they always say, oh, communists want to make everyone equally poor. No, they don't. They want to make everyone equally rich, and the need for private property, the need for the need for inequality, the need for people hoarding stuff will fade away as everyone gets wealthy. The goal of communism is a world with so much material abundance, so much stuff, that no one feels a need to hoard anything anymore. That is the goal, okay? You read Marx, you read Frederick Engels, Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific. The goal is rational state planning of the economy so that we can get to a world in which there is no coercion because there's so much vast material abundance, right? So this idea you have in your head, communism is where everyone gets paid the same wage. Communism is about making everyone equal. Forget it. That's the only way everyone can be equal is if you have a huge amount of material abundance. Abundance is what creates that equality, not the government. Okay, you're completely missing it. So people that say the Soviet Union is state capitalist because the bureaucrats had more money than the average worker have no idea what they're talking about. And that's what I've noticed. A lot of times Trotskyism and anarchist distortions, a lot of times it's not based on what communists actually think. It's an internalization of anti-communism. All right, Mosley. We can talk about Mosley a little bit. Is internalization of anti-communism, right? There was a friend of mine years ago who had another friend. He was a hardline Stalinist, tanky, Marxist-Leninist. And he had a friend who was a Trotskyite. And they were quite friendly. But they realized that probably the biggest disagreement that they had was anti-communism. The Trotskyite, when asked, the question that anyone who believes in socialism or Marx in the United States has to believe is, why in the United States is everyone constantly just really loaded with anti-communism? Why is that? Well, if you asked my friend, who was a ML, who was a tanky, he said, well, that's because of anti-communist propaganda. But according to the Trotskyite, the root cause of anti-communism was reality, was Americans just knew how the Soviet Union was and didn't like it. Well, I'm sorry, Americans don't know how the Soviet Union was, right? I was taught my whole life that everyone in the Soviet Union was poor and starving the entire time. The Soviet Union never accomplished anything. I mean, I'm sorry, but no, Americans don't know anything about communism. Trotskyites believe that Americans looked at the Soviet Union and didn't like what they saw, and that's why they became anti-communists. MLs believe that what Americans believe about the Soviet Union is based on lies. That's a big difference, right? And that, this whole state capitalism thing, right? I was taught in school that the Soviet government wanted to make everyone equal and give everyone the exact same wage no matter how hard they worked. Well, that's not true. But if I kept believing that, and someone pointed out to me the Soviet Union, oh, the guy who runs the steel mill, the state steel industry makes, 10 times what the average person makes or 100 times what the average person makes, I would go, oh, that's not real socialism. Well, I bet if Trotsky had been there, he would have gotten everyone paid equally. That a lot of times anti-communism is rooted purely in not understanding basic facts about what communists believe. It's believing the lies about communism and trying to, anyway, I'm sorry, this got a little confusing.